Good afternoon. My name is Angela Skibris and I'm the kinesiologist, and I am super excited to introduce today one of my favourite kinesiologists, Geraldine Gallagher. She has been working as a kinesiologist for in excess of 38 years, an incredible CV over the time that she's been working as a trainer, a facilitator, someone who's developed her own courses, her own essences. You can find them at www.essenceofchange.com. You can find the first interview that I had with Geraldine on this YouTube channel, The Kinesiologist with a Z. So if you would like to go back and hear more about Geraldine, her journey to becoming the master kinesiologist that she is, you can go back and take a look at that, and you'll enjoy that journey. It's really, really great. Today we wanted to focus on a few other topics. We had such a fun time chatting with each other after many years of not catching up, and it was just a pleasure for me as a student and fellow colleague to interview such an amazing kinesiologist. So it's a real privilege for me to introduce yet again for part 2 of interviews with the kinesiologist with Geraldine Gallagher. So welcome, Geraldine. It's so great to have you here. Can you tell us a little bit more about what you'd like to talk about today? Like, we've got some different topics today.
So I really want, in my work that I do with clients and classes, is to get people back to the simplicity of you're responsible for your own health. Someone might tell you something, but you need to be aware of, is this true for me? And there's many things we can challenge through the skill of muscle testing or muscle monitoring, because the nervous system will give us the feedback. And sometimes you hear people say, oh, well, let's ask the body. You're not asking the body, you're asking the brain what it thinks about it. And this is what I referred to in our earlier talk, that we don't like questions. Because questions elicit the left brain's activity, and the left brain tends to edit out stuff it doesn't like or is too stressful. So it will give you a modified version, or it will give you someone else's opinion. So questions are not the best way of finding the answers. The answers come from the muscle response that we use to gain access. I was working with a young man today, and he's coming up 18, and I said, oh, wow, that's excellent. He's learning to drive, and he's finishing high school and going to uni, and, you know, life adventure starts. But he said he doesn't want to turn 18. And I said, wow. Why not? He said, well, and I said, okay. Your session's about responsibility of being who you are at what point in time. And he said, but at 18, I'll be old. And I had to laugh because
oh dear.
Well, I didn't feel old at 18, but I felt like adventurous. And anyway, we balanced him to take responsibility for a whole lot of things. And it ended up he had to be true to himself and what he wanted in life. And life offers options and opportunities for young people. And while you can train in one area, you may change path some years later. It doesn't mean you've wasted all that time. You've developed enough to work and learn in a new field. And I think that's how I changed direction in career, from working in advertising and creative work to parenthood. And then what will I do with the rest of my life? And I stumbled across kinesiology, and I just loved it from the minute I saw it. So somewhere along a path, you will find an option like that. And we have to be aware of what's available. So awareness that things in the environment are changing and are you adapting is important. Awareness of what's happening around us and how we should behave. And it's not a matter of what's expected of us or other people's opinions of how we should behave, excluding politeness. And I keep emphasizing, if you can't be nice, just be kind. And that covers a whole lot of things, I think. So
Absolutely.
excuse me, I've got a bit of
A tickle.
a tickle, yes. I probably haven't had enough water today. But if you don't take responsibility for your behavior, your decisions, your thinking, who is responsible? And what's the result of living according to someone else's opinions or someone else's expectations? So many parents think, oh, I'd like my child to enter the family business or be a doctor or a lawyer or something. But maybe they just want to be a gardener, and they'll get fulfillment from that. So somewhere along the line, I encourage people, clients who visit me, to get in touch with who they are. It's an age-old question, who am I? But it's all around identity and it's self-identity. And it comes under a heading that I read recently of needing to have a healthy sense of self. And by healthy, it means without contamination or being processed by other people. You know, you're too loud, you're too sick, you're too fat, you're too tall, you know, whatever it is, there's judgments laid upon us, but we don't live our lives through other people's filters of who we are. And that can be difficult because we have to live in a society. We like being people in a society, like a family or a tennis group or a school team. And each one should be supporting the group as a whole. But if you decide you don't want to play soccer anymore and you'd like to go and play tennis, you have to make a new group energy society. But if it was a family business and you decided to leave to go and do something else, maybe the family would think you're not supporting them anymore. It's Mario Martinez's explanation of if you go beyond the pale, you'll get criticized and blamed. But you have to know who you are and what your purpose is on the planet. You know, we're all here for a reason, or we hope there's a reason. And if there's not a reason, let's just have fun and enjoy it. But you don't enjoy it on your own in isolation. You enjoy life with other people. And Peter McCulloch said recently, I had the pleasure of seeing him speak, he said, life is a gift, protect it. He did say a lot of other things too, but life is a gift and we shouldn't ignore it. We should cherish it and nurture it. So awareness of who you are, awareness of the environment that you find yourself in. Is this the right environment? And find one that suits you so that you can change, evolve and grow.
So I'm thinking sense of self, responsibility, all of those things for clients that come into clinic. They might not see that it's an issue with sense of self. They would just come in and say, oh, my father expects me to take over the carpet business and I hate carpet. and it makes me, and I feel unhappy. And then often, you know, I'm imagining the session or the indications sending us down a relative rabbit hole of connections to, you know, their fear possibly of disappointing father, or fear of upsetting the tribal apple cart, letting our family down. You know, it could be a fourth generational carpet business and you're the only son, and so therefore there's a lot of pressure to continue with this so-called legacy, for example. And so there could be a lot of stress there, and an inability to then truly step into their sense of self and value it and make decisions around it. I'm assuming those fears would then have all sorts of consequences as to how they're experiencing themselves in the world.
True. Well, there'll always be fears when you try something new, but we experience change every day. The sun rises and it sets and we go into night. So we know that there's a shift in activities and influences, the same as the changing seasons, but we don't look at the changes in life that easily. And Mario Martinez, in his book, talks about different cultures, and you've got infancy, childhood, adolescence, and young adult, and then adult and aging. So we live according to the rules of these little contexts, or he calls them portals. You just got to get used to his languaging. But a portal is a doorway, isn't it? So you go in one end and you go out the other. So teenager coming into young adult means more responsibility. His mum's not going to tell him to take his raincoat if it's raining. He has to pick it up himself. But they all love to drive the cars and do that type of thing. But he was fine. He ended up very happy when he left, and he said, my headache's gone. He didn't even tell me he had a headache at the time. So that was one good outcome. And,
that's great.
Yes. Well, you understand that changes are made through the mental and emotional, and they will affect the physical body. And Dr. Bruce Lipton talks about your thoughts create chemical changes in you, and it does that through the glandular system, releasing hormones, peptides, and neurotransmitters, and they are the communication chemicals that are involved in the synapse between the brain neurons. And a lot of people think of the brain as being hardwired and we have to rewire it, or you see an image of it with cogs and wheels and things. It's none of those things. According to a neurosurgeon, his name's Raul Jandal, I think I'm pronouncing it right, but he's a neuroscientist, brain surgeon, and his description is that the brain is fluid, that it's like millions of the neurons are like tiny jellyfish, not touching but communicating with little electrical currents, and they work as a flow, like a flow of birds in the sky. You see hundreds or thousands of birds all waving around in a certain pattern. They're all flying in a synchronized flight plan, and it's a bit like an aurora borealis as well. And that's a delightful way to think of the brain neurons having a bit of,
It is. I liked actually the description of the little jellyfish tentacles, actually, and I could almost picture that, the way that the brain's working and connecting, and
neurotransmitters going buzz, 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 and we'll do this.
yes, almost like one of those balls. I can't think what their name is, but you put your hand on it and the little electrical, have you ever seen them? They're like colour, and you put your hands on and the electrical little things come towards where your hand is.
Yeah, well, that's just relating to the energy patterns in your hands anyway. So
Yeah, that's right. So it's like lightning, flashing throughout the brain in different ways. That's a lovely way of looking at the brain. And we do, you see images in books or online with brains as, cogs and things like that. It's quite fascinating to think that it's far more.
well, it's more fluid than that, and it flows
Mm,
than that. And I'm sure that our emotions and our thoughts will change the type of flow that occurs. And that leads on to the importance of good nutrition and good sleep, because the brain, when it sleeps, is still active, and it's active at clearing the debris of the day through the cerebrospinal fluid. And a lot of people don't sleep well. And that's another issue of how do we help people to sleep better? It's a bit like letting them relax sufficiently to change the brain waves. And you can do that through a bit of self-hypnosis. You just tell yourself the same little story each night. I sleep easily. Because most people say, I don't sleep well. And I'm saying, well, let's change the language.
yeah.
I sleep
We keep
easily.
reinforcing and training the brain
And the more
to
you
respond.
can something through repetition, the more it will say, oh, well, yeah, that's how it is. And it does help a lot to learn to relax. And people don't know how to relax.
It's true. I heard something interesting the other day. It seems I may be lucky enough to be interviewing a young woman named Carrie Bennett. She has, for those of you who are interested, she's a clinical nutritionist and very much interested in mitochondria, biology, circadian rhythms, and the effect of light frequencies on the body in terms of our sleep-wake cycle, nutrition, digestion, the effect of light on our skins, particularly early light between dawn and 10 a.m. in particular, dawn in particular, very much so. And she mentioned very quickly, sadly, I can't remember, she did quote someone who had talked about when we sleep, it's important to try and get down to sleep between, sort of no later than 10 o'clock, as between sort of that time between 10 and about 1 a.m. The brain is going through, or the body is going through repairing, restoration, just sort of, I guess, cleaning the system up and doing what it needs to do to repair from the day or what's been happening. And then from 1 onwards until we wake, it goes through a process of sorting, collecting, and placing and clipping memories. And I found that fascinating. Apparently, there's a lot of research around that. For example, the example she gave was you and I could be, doing something all day today, and then at night when she go to bed, the brain will literally go through and clip and cut and paste all the bits and pieces that it doesn't necessarily feel, well, that's not really necessary to have in the memory banks. I mean, we wouldn't necessarily remember every little piece of information from every day. We sort of go on that it considers as important, some things it considers unimportant, puts them here, there. And I thought that made a lot of sense and I wonder if it made sense to you, that sometimes I'll have clients come in and say, well, muscle test or something, and then out of the blue, some memory that literally didn't exist for them suddenly exists again. It's like it's been restored to the memory banks or come back to the forefront, whereas they literally couldn't remember that that moment in time was there and it was related to a trauma. And you do wonder whether the brain might go through a process at night where it thinks, well, that was very, very traumatizing. I think I might put that over there where I'm not going to, it's just too much to think about. I'm going to put it away in the file, do not open. And yeah, I just found that interesting that as kinesiologists, we then often find ourselves stumbling across things that they may not have considered to be connected to their back pain or this chronic headache that they've had for most of their life or whatnot. Yeah.
Well, I agree with that mostly, but I think what happens is we store our memories and certain associations will trigger the activation of it again. And I think with the last 3 years of an enormous amount of fear being spoken about, like you can't go outside, you have to wear a mask, and you can't leave, move 5 kilometers outside your home, and the limitations that were put on the people around the planet in most countries, not all countries, activated other fears that they had. And I do think when the fears come up, all old memories of when they had a virus or they had a bacteria or they had an accident, and as you say, it's usually around a trauma of some kind. Someone said something to them, maybe they fell off their bike, the kid next door hit them, or it could be anything. But for a moment of trauma, all of the little traumas stand up, and you think, my goodness, how did I cope with that? We coped by suppressing how we truly felt. And generally, you can find the emotions around a trauma time and clear those. We've got some wonderful techniques in kinesiology to do that. And a lot of it involves different eye patterns, because where you look at any point in time activates a different neuron, or 10 neurons over here, or you look over there and a neuron over here will jump up and say, I remember something when you look there. So our eye movements and where we look, we turn on little memory banks, and some of those are not happy ones. And there's a lot of discussion on the internet and a lot of webinars and what do they call them? Summits. There's dozens of them at the moment, and they're focusing very much on trauma and pain at the moment. So it's going to wake up a lot in people who see some of those. And what it does is give us more work, because an old client will ring up and says, I haven't been for 2 years and I've just got this thing that's reoccurring. And you think, okay, it doesn't matter what triggered the association. We find a way of identifying it and getting better resources for the person. So that's how our work travels, isn't it?
It absolutely is. And how does that relate, Geraldine, to that awareness? So the lack of sense of self, developing awareness of ourselves in our lives and the issues that we're facing. How does that connect into the 4 quadrants of the brain? How does what we do relate to that?
Well, we often hear about the left side of the brain being the sequential, the one that imagines or records bits and pieces. Like the left side of the brain will know that the hand's made up of a thumb and 4 fingers, and it's got a big piece there. But it's the right brain that says, oh, that's a picture of a hand, and a hand can do this, and it can paint, it can swim, it can, soothe you. But the left hand just sees it as like single items. But when both hemispheres work together, you see the practical application of, we've got these fingers and they can do that. We can make pottery, we can paint a picture, we can dance, we can make gestures that expand our thinking or bring our thinking closed. So brain integration has been around for a while, but there's a book out called Strategy of the Dolphin, and it's really a business, executive business book that talks about the sharks, the carps, and the dolphins that swim in the ocean. And the sharks are the predators, the carps are the victims, and the dolphins ride the waves. And so it's better to be a dolphin. But what they talk about is you've got a forebrain activity and a backbrain activity. And we know that new information comes in the forebrain and it gets transferred to both sides of the brain as a crossover and straight back. So if the hemispheres are not working together, and kids and adults who are a bit dyslexic will use one side of their brain and turn it off to use the other side. So there's not a common link, but there really is a common band of, I don't know what you call them now, I forget the name, neurofibers, that's called the corpus callosum, where it joins the two hemispheres. The space between a male's two hemispheres is further apart than a female's. I'm not sure of the relevance of that, but that's what some books suggest. So we not only need to know what's happening left and right, we need to know what's happening in the forebrain and the backbrain. And a lot of the work that I studied initially through neurotraining was the fears and the defense systems are in the back of the left hemisphere. And in panic and anxiety and shock and trauma, you shut off the right hemisphere and the front, you don't want any more new information coming in, and you operate out of your defenses, out of your fears. And that's limiting you to 25% of brain possibility of function. These authors of the Strategy of the Dolphin put them into I control, I explore, I pursue, I preserve. And that's an interesting pattern to look at, because some people are more in let's preserve things the way they are, or preserve life. Let's create the garden so we can feed ourselves. And this one is I want to control everything, and they're usually an expert in something. And this one in the front is the explorer, the searcher, the visionary. And this one back here, they term the one that pursues, the super achiever, the one that wants to win at all costs. They're the competitor, the doer. So when you look at different qualities that these authors have given to it, and we line it up with what we know as new information, well, yeah, we don't need to control it and be exact, but we need to search around and explore further. That makes sense. And it also makes sense that the one that pursues everything would be the one that tries to control through fear and power. But the preserve one are the guardians of the whole exercise or project or life. So it's an interesting book. It was written in 1988. It's old. You'll only get a second-hand copy, I think, at this stage. But I found that really interesting, and I often use it as what's the percentage of activity in the different quadrants of the brain, and use that as a guideline before we do our session, and then at the end of the session see if they're talking to each other a bit more easily. And you don't want too much overactivity, you don't want too much underactivity, you just want the different quadrants to be working generally in the same power source. You don't want them all to be 90 because you just go nuts, I think. You don't want them all to be half asleep at 20. So it's another little way of using percentages in our testing. And I find that good to integrate brain functions, and it all comes down to you've got to change someone's belief system, their mental attitude, and look at better values that support them. So all of that, emotions hold it all together. So we have to get emotions calm and let go of the anger and let go of the blame and be adaptable.
So an example might be someone who may really want to, let's say, write a book. They would love to write and publish a book.
Yeah.
They have the story and they've got the book sitting there, but their experiences in the past, or could be things that their family told them about people who write books, artists don't make any money, or you know, go and get a real job. You know, whatever the story is that person has in their mind about being more creative. So every time they go to get to the nitty-gritty of maybe publishing, they find themselves getting a bit lack of clarity, can't make a decision, you know, thwarting themselves, getting in their own way or getting stuck. And so I'm assuming that if we look at it like an integration exercise, as soon as we go into those fears, that frontal part, which deals with all the creativity and solutions, shuts down. We don't have access to all our solutions, and we're trying to, you know, go around and round in the hamster wheel of our brainstem, which is just giving us very, you know, old, outdated solutions for something that we haven't experienced yet, and you know why people can often get stuck, or then so what types of ways would you maybe help someone like that to move out of that fight flight mode and into their creative brain to make new decisions?
Interesting question. And you, Angela, have written 2 books already. Are you in a third one, are you?
I think I'm in a third one. And I think the last session I had with you was just before I released my first book. So, yeah.
You know all about the creative process of writing and publishing. And it is a process, a step-by-step process. But you have to get the words out on the paper first and in some sort of order. So that's where you need the left brain to say, well, this is chapter 1 and move this chapter forward or back. But you need to have the threads of the creative visionary side of the right hemisphere of what's the purpose of the book, you know, and it's not just, I need to write a bestseller and be famous. Well, everyone has a book in them, you're told, but not everyone wants to write a book and not everyone needs to. I buy dozens, hundreds of books over the years, and I just love to read, but I like to read a real book. So I like a hard-covered book with nice paper. I don't like these paperbacks that don't open very well, or but sometimes you have to buy a paperback because they bring that out 6 months before the hardback. So if you want to read it, you buy the paperback. So we all have our little quirks about how we read, how we write, and how we produce something for someone else to enjoy. So you have to have a reason to write something. You just can't write a bestseller. A woman I know in the UK, she writes under a pseudonym, but everyone she posts everything under her own name, so everyone knows what the name is. She's got these lovely fantasy, they're murder mystery books actually, and they're fun to read. They're not serious murder mysteries. And she's got a really lovely, light way of reading and writing. And I can just hear her reciting the whole thing when I read the lines. So I don't think I answered your question then. How do I do that? I look for, in a client, if they want to read, if they want to write, if they want to sing or they want to dance, they have to start doing something. So a writer needs to write an article or a chapter and publish it on, Amazon and KDP, and get one little bit out there, and then you're a published author, and it's not so daunting as going through a publisher and editors. But the other versions, I think, have typos and sentence construction problems. I think my writing's a bit all over the place, but other people have done a spell check on it for me before I put out a workbook. But sometimes there's something left behind, and I'm not worried about that so much. If people worry about a typo, they're missing the point of what the words represent. So no one's perfect, just get the message. So make sure that anyone who wants to write a book, make sure what your message is and how you relate it to who you think your audience is. But the audience may be something different to that. So as a kinesiologist, I've bought many books that are not related to kinesiology, because they talk about how people think. And I think not everyone thinks efficiently or easily, and they're too ready to repeat something they've been told and think it's true or think it's okay to say. But where is the truth for you? People need to learn to think, and we get back to, you need your brain to be able to work synergistically, coherently, to get the message out, whatever the message is, whether it's icing cakes or building a bridge or something. I worked with an elderly man many years ago, and he was a landscape gardener, and his son came in with him, and he said, my dad's getting old and he needs to leave a legacy. And he wanted to write a book about how he did his landscaping. And I said, well, just get him to talk about it and record it, and you, as his son, can find people to transcribe it and put it into a form where it can be edited and published. And so it became a joint venture for the two of them. But he was worried his knowledge would get left behind. So I think we all have to think about, what do we know that someone else might want to know down the track?
That's right.
So I think if any of your listeners are wanting to write a book, write it. Get the first one out, and then the second one will be easier.
That's right. And it's much easier these days with a lot of self-publishing and all that kind of thing. It's quite simple these days to get your work out there to people. So it's wonderful. So as a kinesiologist, we would be dealing with someone who may come in and say, oh, I'm on the very edge of, handing it over to the publishers, but something's holding me back, or I've got fears around that. So we may then, or what sort of techniques or ways have you in the past maybe worked with someone like that who's got fears or?
Well, I think fears are at the bottom of a lot of our problems, because fears are mental things, fearing something physical will happen, and it's controlled by negative emotions. So you have to look at what is the thinking behind it, like this young man I was working with, he thought 18 was going to be old compared with childhood, I suppose. And what's the fear around getting old? And his fear started off with that he wouldn't be able to do things as easily as he could now. But really, it was a fear that he would die and not know his purpose. And I thought, this is a bigger picture than what even I imagined, because a card came up for him. You've got options in your life purpose. And it was from a set of cards that I don't use often. And he even laughed at it. He said, "Is this a deck of cards about angels?" And I said, "Well, they're just the storytellers." And I said, "Just look at the words, options." And he said, "Yes, all right, yep." And he wanted to take a photo of the card to take home. So it got to him. So we got to that card by kinesiology. If I would not have chosen that deck for him personally, but
No.
his neurology said there is a card there that will make sense to him. And when I found it, he said, yes, that's true. So that's, I think, the thrill of, we don't have to know the answers.
No.
We just have to be diligent that we're challenging the right things for him to be able to provide the answers for you, or for him, actually. So it's a matter of resources around you.
That's right. And I find, I don't know if you find, but recently I find every now and then I need to Google the definition of a word, or a definition of something that's happening to a person. I've become more passionate about understanding, is it etymology? Is that the study of words, of language? I think it's something like that. I've become quite interested in, you see a word that you see every day, and then you think, what does that actually mean? Like, what, I know we say it, and I'll often say to my client, oh, okay, you just said this word. Do you know what it means? And they'll say, oh, well, yes, it's, and I was like, well, I actually don't know that I do really know. And they won't even be able to give you a definition. It's simple word. And then once we go into the actual definition of a word, or the expanded definition of a word, we often sit back and think, I didn't know that. And tapping into what you said just now about, we often don't know all the answers, but we're just trying to bring together certain cues, or we might have a list, and the list might not be exactly what the person has in mind, but it might be close enough to get there, close enough to sort of aim us in the correct direction. I had a client yesterday who's had issues with weight ever since she had quite a serious illness many years ago, and she said, my weight just won't stabilize. It doesn't matter what I eat or don't eat. And it turned out that this particular word, I don't know if I hadn't consciously heard the word leptins before.
I know leptins, yeah.
And I personally, maybe they're on the list, but I don't remember it. And leptin came up, and I said, I don't know what a leptin is. So I Googled it, and we read it out. And of course, it's a hormone. And I like that I'm understanding more that hormones are not so much a chemical as much as they are a chemical, but they're like messengers or signals in the body. And leptin is a signal in the body. So technically, if we're in a finely tuned organism of a body, these leptins the amount of leptins which are in our adipose tissue, or the fat in our body, should, when we have enough fat stored, send a message to the hypothalamus to let it know that we don't need to store any more fat, or that we can release fat, or that we can burn fat, depending on what we're eating, how much we're eating. If we're in starvation, it might send okay, stop burning fat, we're getting a bit low, whatever. It's like this message system around how much fat we ought to have on our body or not. And it turned out that the particular medical process that she went through, which involved type of medicine, targets suppressing leptins because they're a part of the the cell growth of this particular issue, and so they want to stop it happening, right?
Yeah.
And I mean, I'm sitting here thinking, I've got no idea what a leptin is. I had no idea it had a relationship to the illness she had, and no idea that it was targeted. These cells are targeted. So, and she said, actually, that's exactly when, after that, I blew up and I never have been able to. It's like that, you know, I exercise, I eat healthily, you know, so we had to look at how we could support her body through various means, even outside the session, but also that there are these little receptors around the cell, and this particular drug snips the receptors so that it stops sending this message to stop, obviously, this issue that she had. So on some level, you have on one side of it, yes, the particular drug that she took had a positive effect on her issue, but it left her with this other problem. So we then look at processes, techniques to restore communication. So there's a communication issue between these little signaling cells or hormones called leptins and the hypothalamus. So we did what we call a hypothalamus reset, which you've probably done 100 times before, where we work with switching on the glands. We have techniques that we do where we switch on and reset the hypothalamus gland, along with some eye modes and breathing around communication or reconnecting communication. And so to cut a long story short, we're obviously not here, we don't treat, diagnose, you know, that's not what we do, but often we dive into what's underneath what's happened to somebody and work with the symptoms that have been sort of left behind and how we might restore homeostasis in the body some way. I left the session thinking, I now know so much more about the human body than I did an hour ago. It's amazing.
Well, I can add a little bit more to that story. There's two hormones that work together. You've got leptin that tells you you've eaten enough, don't eat anymore.
That's right.
You've got ghrelin, which says you're hungry, you need to eat now. So one will turn on and then the other will say you've had enough. So if they have turned down leptin that advises the energy by the hypothalamus and all the hierarchy down of the glands, the person keeps eating or continues to feel hungry in some way, and they'll go for food that will satisfy. So what you did with the hypothalamus exercise was actually to acknowledge there were two switches, not one. So it's, again, a communication. You're hungry, eat. You've had enough, stop. And that's how those two work together. So understanding your hormones is a fascinating study to do. And I advise all students of kinesiology to read books on hormones. And there's a lot of good authors out there that have books. So learn a bit more and learn how one turns something on, another turns it off when they're working synergistically. No, things are. So that was a great story, Angela.
It was so fascinating, and that's what I think I love most about kinesiology, is that I come to each session with a sense of wonder, and I wonder where we'll go today, and a little bit like falling down the rabbit hole into Wonderland, into the upside down, and discovering what's going on in the world underneath the person's world. I guess, like if you think about it, like that kind of analogy, it's turning things upside down, having a look at, well, what's underneath all of this, and what role has do the genes possibly have programming that we've had from conception to birth that's so incredibly powerful, that period of time between conception and birth. And then, of course, on a cellular level, we have access to all the libraries of all our ancestry, in my humble opinion, and it's becoming more scientifically understood that that's the case. So it's...
I wouldn't say all of our ancestors, but you can go back 4 or 8 or 12 generations. If you go further back than that, it's a bit like ancestral soup, I call it. Like
yes, that's true.
It's like a real
It's
mixture.
a bit diluted.
And you can't tell the carrots from the parsnips or the beans.
That's true.
So, I tend to not go back too far, or I go back as far as they need to. And if they need to go back to a distant generation that there's no way of knowing where the ancestors were, it's because they need to distance themselves from the issue that they've got and still think it's related to something they inherited. But our genes that carry basic information respond to an environment they find themselves in. So there's no such thing really as a cancer gene. Any gene will turn on cancer to the right environment. And Bruce Lipton goes into that in a lot of detail. And the study is now quite broad of epigenetics. That means the greater genetic influence. But the genetic influence relates to the environment we find ourselves in that triggers a reference.
So would you say, if we look at it like that, inside of Bruce Lipton's scientific research, that part of what we do with clients in a session is discover the triggers that the environment is causing in a person, and attempt to help the person to adapt to those triggers so that they may adapt to their environment, thereby changing the way that their body is expressing their genetic...
Yes, generally, I think that's true. Adaptation to change, like we adapt to the weather. If it's cold, we put on a jumper. If it's hot, we take it off. So we all know that we can adapt and not blame the weather for us feeling hot. So we take responsibility. Let me dress according to the weather. And that goes into any situation up until it goes against your values. So if you're in an office situation, environment, and you're expected to do certain things that are not your responsibility. I had a client once that people, because she was efficient and got things done, people who had extra work would say, here, I think, can you do this for me? And she'd have a pile of things on her desk that were not related to her own personal manager. And I said, just give them back. Not your responsibility. They can give it to someone else. But she was worried sick that she couldn't get the pile down. And that caused a lot of stress and hair loss and rashes and all sorts of things. And I said, no, if they're not your immediate boss and you have time to spare, which she didn't have, but if she had time to spare, she should go to her immediate boss and say, what else, can I do? But others got into the habit of putting it on her desk and it would get done. But what cost to my client? So
she may have had a suppressed ability to say no, or, fears around saying no, whatnot.
Well, because she was efficient, she knew she could tackle it, but she didn't know when she excessed, or when she did that to excess, when she exceeded her load. And I think we all have to know when we've done enough, had enough, the same with the leptin, you've eaten enough, time to stop and let the body digest what you've just eaten. So that always needs a rest time after an activity. And the same with our brain, and sleep does that. So everything sort of ties in together. I mean, when you're studying, when kids are studying, I suggest they do an hour's study and 15 minutes break. And, Dr. Srini Pillay wrote a book called Tinker, Dabble, Doodle, Try. And it's all around programming work and rest, because it gives the brain time to file the information you've just learned, and then you go and learn another piece. So if you've got 4 hours study, you need little breaks in between. And you just go and do nothing. You just
Switch off.
Yeah, switch off. Well, you don't really, you switch off the activity and you go and you do something that the right brain might like, and you doodle, or you sing, or you do a little dance, or you walk the letterbox and back again, and you make a cup of tea, have a glass of water, you get up and you go and you do something different. And then you come back with a glass of water, you sit down, you start again.
Imagining the brain's uploading and integrating.
Right, and you just then do another hour's work. I think it was 45 minutes and 15 minutes break, but you can have them to whatever's comfortable for you, but you have to understand that after 90 minutes, the brain totally switches, because it goes from left, I can't remember what it is now, left hemisphere to both hemispheres to right, and I think there's something like 20 or 30 minutes for each. And then if you don't have a break by 90 minutes, you'll actually get very tired, or you'll just stop altogether. Some people push through, but the quality of the work after that 90 minutes is gone. So lecturers shouldn't go longer than an hour and a half.
Yes, I did many 2 or 3 hour lectures. I must admit that I was not conscious in. That's for sure. That makes me think about my early days in music. So I have a degree, a bachelor's degree in music as a professional flautist. That was where I thought I was going to go before kinesiology. And I still do a lot of music, but I remember the early days, not so much now, but there was very much in our education. It could be well more than an hour of one-on-one tuition. And the tuition was very much, again, so it might be a bar that I stumble on or keep getting incorrect. And, it would just be again, do the bar again. No, wrong, do the bar again. And you would play this bar and, invariably incorrectly over and over and over again. And then we were sort of taught to spend, some days at uni, I was doing 6-7 hours a day practice, and you would be in your room practicing a bar or a particular part of this piece over and over. And what would be the bar that I would always stumble on when I got on stage would be that bar that I practiced 15,000 times, because all I did was practice a mistake and taught the brain, even though I was trying not to make the mistake, I taught the brain, I just kept creating that pathway of that stumble. So, you'd be on stage and half the time I think you weren't even reading the music, but then you realise, where am I? You're coming up to that dreaded bar, and it would get you every time. And so years later, I remember doing some other study, and I can't remember what the book was at the time. It came with tapes back in the day when there were still tapes, came with these tapes. And this gentleman, which I wish I could remember his name, basically taught us how to do practice in much shorter bursts and to deconstruct the bars. If there was a bar that by nature you were just having a funny moment with, you had to break it up in a very different way, almost in a very left brain way, not that sort of more right brain way where you're trying to be creative inside the bar that's not working. And then you would have fears about that bar. So, your frontal brain would then, obviously, I'm realizing, be shut down when you come up to that bar. So we would just completely pull this bar apart and do maybe 2 or 3 notes. And you just do the 2 or 3 notes, the 2 or 3 notes, and then the next 3 notes, and the next 2 notes. And then you might join the first 2 patterns and then the 3 patterns until you had the whole sequence correctly uploaded into the brain. And he spoke very passionately about not over practicing, and as soon as you're stumbling, stop. As soon as you're stumbling on a bar and you just keep making that mistake, to stop and go away and do something completely different for 10-15 minutes and come back to the bar.
It's the same principle there.
Yeah.
So you finally learned the bar.
I learned that bar all right. I learned it. And it would generally be just one little section that you would tend to have a problem with. And so that changed everything. The way I used to teach flute as well, and it changed everything the way I would. As soon as I'd see someone, it's just something that happens for people where just something in particular will get them. And you just come back and treat that bar like a piece of cake and cut it up and give the brain the opportunity to just look at it at all sorts of different angles and then come at it again. And then if they're having trouble, we'd actually go and play a different piece, go do something, play a piece they like to play, they find easy to play, and then come back to it. And often they would be fine with that bar. So it's really interesting.
That is interesting. So our brain learns by repetition, but we have to make repetition is what we want to achieve, isn't it? So a lot of our discussion today has been around learning. And there are a lot of things that come in as blocks to learning, and some of it is habits on devices that children have from early age, like something on an iPad to get a certain bass come up, or blowing something up. And I think those times on devices playing games should be limited. Kids should be outside climbing trees and digging in the ground and looking for cicadas or worms or something, exploring nature a bit more than a cartoon, which is not real life. And a lot of talk currently about artificial intelligence writing copy and creating images, but they all look the same. And the copy they write can't be unique or different, or it can't be really appropriate to what you're wanting to say yourself. It might be someone else's thought that's been programmed in. So it may curb creativity a little bit. You might do some of it and then edit it. But learn to use your own brain is what I like to tell people.
That's right. I think one of the tools, just slightly changing topic now, do you have a particularly favourite process or tool that you like to use in clinic? I think, a big part of kinesiology is obviously the muscle testing that we do. It's the tool that we use to gain the insights in a way. And then often part of the experience for a client is we're sort of gatherers of wonderful processes, tools, and things that the person would lean towards choosing through the indicator as something that may help them to improve a resource or take a stress off something. Anything that you particularly enjoy or have found to be quite powerful with people?
Interesting question, because it's not one tool. It would be using eye directions and eye patterns, because that will activate different memories, and I like to add a visual to it. It can be a symbol. Often it's an I Ching hexagram, or in the case today it was balance your options, but it was an angel with the balancing scales, which was an odd image, but it's
Yes.
a young man, and he wanted to take home that image. And I think it relates to the memories we're trying to diffuse or infuse. Memories are stored as visuals. You think of your first bike. I might have mentioned that in the first interview. I use bike often, but my first memory of a bike comes in as a medium-sized yellow bike with a basket, but it wasn't my first bike. My first bike had it was red and tiny wheels and trainer wheels. So I don't think that is my first bike. And I don't know why, but the image comes first, and then the little red bike comes in second. So there's a priority system even in our visual memories. So the eye patterns access the visuals, which access the story behind the visual. And eye patterns and eye movements are one of the most powerful things we can use. And we muscle test which eye movement goes with which process we're doing. And there's relevance there to what else is linked to the eye positions, such as brain functions, or what other things? I forget what else. Different people.
Geraldine at times.
Not in eye positions. There are other things that are linked to the positions that relate back to the
so auditory, digital, maybe more
associations. Yes. Auditory digital, though, is an interesting one, because that's not a primary one, but it's a dominant one, which is self-talk, which overrides everything. What do you tell yourself, every time? Oh, no, you can't do that, or not to do that. Oh, I think I might do it anyway. And, it's a constant babble that interferes with, I need to do this now, whatever it is. So I think NLP gives us some nice, simple things about, the visual things, the auditory, and loud people are a bit kinesthetic, and they might lap themselves as they're talking. Oh, yeah, it was good, wasn't it?
Yes.
But often they will move their eyes in certain positions, whether it's down or up or sideways. So when you're doing eye positions, you're taking in all the attributes of NLP plus other things. And so if you want my most valuable tool, it's knowing which eye pattern to do for which stressor, or which thing you want to install as a new program. Because we run from programs, it's easier to have a program. So make sure that the program that you have running is one that you want and you've created yourself, and not been determined by someone else in the environment. We can get guidelines from other people who've done it before, but what suits you for this point in time, which means stay in the present time. And the eyes are very important, I think, as part of our neurology. But the visual links to the auditory, which links to the vocalization and all the other senses we have. So we're influenced greatly by our sense of something. And it gets back to what we started with. People don't have a healthy sense of self. They have a description of self, but it's not a healthy one. It's not a happy one. And that's where we have to change their perception of self.
Of themselves. And sometimes we can add into that wonderful, simple tool of eye modes, things like cross-crawling, cross-crawling, I don't know if you've ever used a combination of a reset of, say it's an eye mode that goes across the front here, present time, connected eye mode, and then as part of that integration you might then start some cross-crawling, which is what babies do when they're first learning to integrate the brain. And you'll find in clinic, and I'm sure you find too, there are some people that literally can't cross their midline. They'll try and put what you're actually doing when you cross is one hand to the opposite knee, like you're marching, but you're crossing the midlines. That's helping the brain to integrate. So you do some eye modes and cross crawling at the same time, and then you might ask them to hum happy birthday at the same time to bring in a completely different part of the brain function. And then you'll notice the arms and legs all over the place because it's having trouble to do all those things, and eventually it'll come together. And I've seen incredible shifts just in doing something like that on a particular stressor or problem with people. And I think, you're in clinic every day, you see people, children who are having, maybe learning difficulties, those types of things are wonderful with, or they could be having issues with concentration or balance or something like that. You see it working, but often you think, oh, I wonder how that works, or does it really work? And you question. For me, where I understood the power of cross-crawling, eye modes and breathing and humming, was I decided to start ice skating. Now, I've done a little bit of ice skating as a leisure, but I started classes, and there was a particular thing we had to do where you would push one leg out to the side and the other leg out to the side like this, but you're going backwards, which is also very terrifying. Anyhow, I remember thinking this particular day, I feel like I was experiencing this leg just wouldn't push out. And I'm thinking, this leg, no problem, pushing out, doing what it had to do. And I'm standing there and I'm, leg, move. And it's not like I'm a quadriplegic, but it was this really strange experience of feeling like I had no control over that leg to do what I wanted it to do. And so I thought, blow this. I got off the ice and went into a private room because people would think I'm a bit nutty maybe if they saw me. So I'm here marching in my ice skates, cross-crawling, and I did eye rotations at the same time and hummed happy birthday. Gladly someone didn't come in and find me doing that. Anyway, do you know, I went back on the ice and my leg, and it worked. And I just thought, that's a perfect example of what, I don't know what happened there. I don't know what I fired up in particularly in my brain that suddenly had me reconnect to that muscle, tendon, firing. I don't know what it was, but it had me after all these years on the ice thinking, that is amazing. And a really good example of how something can shift.
Well, Angela, it is a good example of how we can train the brain with a simple pattern of movement of just the body and then add the eye movements to it. And you add a humming, which means it's more of a right brain activity because it's the right brain that sings and dances and hums. The left brain counts 1, 2, 3, 4. But doing that is a simple combination to achieve something that you wanted to do. And often we overlook the simple things we've learned early in our training and think we have to go to more complex procedures, which at times you find yourself involved in, but there are simpler patterns that we can do. And to get back to your original question, what's the one tool? I think it's the mixed with, and you've mixed it with movement and something you vocalized. So that's like a powerful combination of things to do. So good on you, Sue. I skated.
Yes, well, I'm not, I'm fine at going forwards. It's backwards. I think I need a balance on that. As soon as I need to go backwards, the fear of falling is just incredible when you're going backwards on ice, on blades at the same time. So, and yet I look and think there's nothing more beautiful than someone ice skating backwards. But it's not as simple as it looks, I can tell you.
I don't think I'll be trying that now.
Oh, that's right. But it was certainly, I could feel in doing the ice skating and the way that they would ask you to move your body, you can really feel the brain trying to, because it's something it's not done before, trying to work around that. And this particular thing, it was just strange. So from one left side to right side, I was having trouble. So I thought, well, what's a simple way that I might be able to just get a little bit more integration happening here? It just worked. It was just brilliant.
Well, integration is of the brain and the body coordinated together. So we want integration of a lot of different things. We want integration of our digestive system and our elimination. We want an integration between what we touch and our lymphatic system. Our immune system to be integrated. And you were talking about the microbiome before. I think we're rambling again, aren't we?
We are. We've done. Do you know what? It's just so you know, it's 5:15, and whenever you feel we've been here a while, and I think we could be here for a few more hours, but that's okay.
No,
we won't.
Microbiome is an integrated environment of bacteria and various things that combine to provide energy for us. So make sure what you eat is benefiting you and the microbiome, because if there's a disturbance there, you get symptoms, headaches, pains, aches, sore feet, or whatever. So integration of the big picture of how you move and of the microcosm, which is the microbiome, the gut stuff.
Which we're learning more and more is so important to our serotonin levels and dopamine and anxiety, depression. We're learning more and more is associated more with gut health and possibly our brain.
Yes. Well, gut health will affect your brain function. So get them both talking to each other and you're a happy person.
That's right. That's right. That's been wonderful. Such a wonderful conversation today about all sorts of great things and just a few more examples, I guess, of what someone might expect in a session. You might find yourself doing some cross-crawling, eye modes and breathing, and that little example I gave before shows, okay, for me it was something that was happening physical, but it can sometimes be, you know, someone might be stumbling over an emotional state, something happening in their gut, something, you know, a pain or an ache, that how incredibly this integration or change can happen within the brain and the rest of the nervous system so that someone finds relief. And I think as kinesiologists, we're still I feel like we're on the frontier of truly understanding how that all works and why we can be holding a point, and maybe it's to do with the fascia and the fascia and the communication system with the rest of the body. But I can be holding a point on someone's neck or shoulder, and they can say, oh, I just had a big jerk in my foot. And so, you know, we're such a, the being is so holistic, and so there's no reason why I can't be touching your shoulder and the foot being stimulated for some reason or another. So it's, I think science is finally catching up to some of the things that we've been doing for a long time and getting results with, and sometimes maybe not quite truly understanding why.
Well, yeah, science is proving what we do, I think.
Yes, I
Which
like
is-
that.
Well, it's a bit ambitious to say that, but we know we make changes, and sometimes we don't always understand the how.
Yes.
But when we get results with no harm to the person, and they're feeling fine, and they're functioning better as to who they are, I think we do a good job. So.
That's right. It's certainly a wonderful way to support anything else the person's doing for their wellness. And so, just to finish off, I know there was one other thing you mentioned before the interview is the role that experiencing blame or externalizing blame has in preventing us from living the life that we truly want to. How do you perceive that, Jerry?
I think that it's a case of responsibility for our thoughts, our feelings, and our actions as a human being, whether you're a child, an adolescent, or an adult, or an older person. We have to be aware that what we do, say, and think is going to have an effect on someone else. It cannot not affect someone else. And it's too easy to blame someone for a demise that you feel you have. So it's, I could give some examples, but some of them I think are a bit, well, I take eating, for instance, the food you eat. We know healthy food is useful for a healthy brain and body. And yet we are bombarded with advertisements for different types of food, and the foods are loaded with sugar, chemicals and flavorings, and not much of the original food that nature created. So when you get far away from a real food that's fresh and freshly cooked, if it's been cooked and changed and coloured and add things like a margarine, for instance. I shouldn't have mentioned a particular thing probably, but it's not a real food anymore. It just looks like a real food, but it's quite toxic in the body because of the chemicals that it has. Now, we just need to avoid added chemicals and too much sugar. Sugar is one of the most detrimental things we add to a lot of our food, and it's one of the hardest to eliminate because it's in a lot of foods, a lot of prepared, packaged, jarred foods, the tinned foods. You just look for things without added sugar, and then they'll put pear juice or apple juice in it. So it's loaded with a natural sugar, so it has to be sugar-free. But the thing is, eat an apple. Don't go and buy a can of apples that have got sweeteners added to it. There might be something in the old adage, an apple a day keeps the doctor away. But an apple's full of good things, as long as it hasn't got sprays on it and things like that.
Exactly.
So I don't know whether I answered your question then.
Yeah, so I guess when we think about blame like that with eating, it's like, well, maybe, you know, it's society's fault as to why I'm
Yes.
overweight or I'm whatever, rather than saying, well, I'm the only one who's putting the food in my mouth.
That's right. Like your mother and father may have told you to eat the food and be grateful that, you know, other kids are starving somewhere on the planet. But that was just bribery to make you eat the food that was prepared. But if you didn't feel like eating it, or if it didn't go down well, there's some natural, instinctive reason why you shouldn't be eating it. And you know, if my children didn't want to finish their meal, I took the meal away. Sometimes I'd leave it on the bench, and if they got hungry later, they could go back to it, or there was just no other food for them. So apart from something that I thought they could eat, I was a bit of a tyrant in the early days, I think, as a parent, but they turned out all right.
I think they all were in those days. I know my parents were.
So, but I know when I was young, we were bribed with ice cream and rock melon for dessert if we ate all our vegetables. And I thought, now it's a poor combination to start with as a dessert, and it's not really a dessert. It's just going to wreck all the good food you ate before it. So sugar as a reward is not a reward at all. It's really creating victim status, and we have to be responsible for what we put in our mouth these days and the choices we make. And if we can encourage other people to eat in a healthy way, I think that's a good thing to do without blaming the government, the manufacturer. You know, they've got their reasons for doing things, and it's not your health that's the reason behind it. So
No.
It's too easy to blame someone else. But I think take responsibility for your own actions and your own reactions, and learn to respond better to challenges in life. Say it's not my fault. It's just taking on a victim status, and I don't subscribe to that.
So it could be seen that part of the kinesiologist's role in a dichotomy like that, someone coming in and they've got issues with overeating or blaming because the way my mother brought me up and whatever, I can't let sugar alone because we always ate cakes as kids or whatnot. Helping people to access more of their ability to take full responsibility of self, rather than externalizing all the reasons why I can't stop, and give them the power to feel like they can stop. And I think as soon as we move out of that blame, well, then we have power to change something, because I guess while ever we're in blame, there is no power to change something. So it's taking back that, oh gosh, now that I take full responsibility, I can see all the options I have in making a difference.
Yeah, I agree with that. So many people don't want that responsibility, though. And I think for you to be successful, you have to be responsible for your decisions and your behaviours and how you treat yourself and the world you live in. So that's what I think.
I like that. Well, we could be here for hours more, but we'll leave it for part 3 in weeks to come. And just want to thank you again for spending some time with us and letting us into your world of kinesiology, how you work. And it's just been a real pleasure and a privilege. And I look forward to chatting with you again very soon. Just remind us how people can find you. You're in Camaray in Sydney, and how they can find you, Jerry.
Well, I'm in Camaray in Sydney, just near North Sydney and Crow's Nest. And my email is geraldine@essenceofchange.com, or you can go and have a look on the website and you can connect to me through the website. So the website's essenceofchange.com.
And is that back up and running now, Geraldine?
It's still running the old program, the old website, I think. So no,
But it may go through a little bit of an upgrade any moment, but you can get access to.
But I haven't heard from the developer as to what's been
happening.
So
That's okay.
it's in the pipeline. It's in a work in progress, let's say.
Great. For those who may not know, Geraldine has a beautiful set of essences called the Essences of Change, which you can check out at that website, essenceofchange.com. And you can connect with Geraldine about future courses that she has coming up, or by appointment for one-on-one private sessions. So yeah, if you're interested in doing any of those things, please don't hesitate. You'll also find Geraldine on Instagram and Facebook. And I just can't thank you enough for giving us more of your very precious time today, Geraldine.
Well, thank you, Angela, for the work that you do too in bringing kinesiology to the forefront of people's awareness, and keep doing what you're doing.
Thank you so much. I appreciate your time. Thank you. I look forward to seeing you again soon.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.